Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So first of all, I welcome everyone on behalf of Mata Tripta Gurdwara Sahib and Nath Pragas USA to our second session of Sikh Women Book Club. Before I invite our first speaker, I want to announce the poetry recital that is going to take place at Mata Tripta Gurdwara Sahib on June 25th from 4 to 6:30 p.m. So this is in commemoration of celebrating 100 years of Sikh migration to Michigan. So so we are inviting all the Sikh youths and adults to this program. So those who are interested, they can send us an email to nathpragasusa@gmail.com. So I encourage everyone to participate in this program, please. So our first speaker is Guneet Kaur. She's going to talk about, she's going to review the book called Toto Chan. And the name of the author is Tetsuko Koryoanagi. Sorry, yes. So she's actually this is one of the best-seller. It's an autobiographical book, and one of the best-sellers of Japan till today, and very, very popular among young adults. So, and it's my pleasure to invite our first presenter, Guneet Kaur, to the podium. Welcome, Guneet.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you all for coming here this afternoon. I'm Guneet Kaur, and for my first reading for this club, I picked up Toto-chan, The Little Girl at the Window by Tetsuko Kuroyanagi. Kuroyanagi is a famous Japanese actress and TV show hostess. She was born in Tokyo City, now Tokyo, on August 9, 1933, to Moritsuna and Cho Kuroyanagi. Her father, Moritsuna, was a concertmaster and violinist, while her mother was a housewife. Tetsuko initially wanted to become an opera singer, but after graduating from the Tokyo College of Music, she realized that her true calling was towards the entertainment industry. She voiced Lady Penelope in The Thunderbirds, a British science fiction TV series, but she rose to fame with her afternoon TV program Tetsuko's Room, the first talk show on Japanese television. Her talk show featured her interviewing celebrities from all over the world and from various fields like sports, politics, and television. In 1981, Kuroyanagi's fame rose even further when she published Toto-chan, The Little Girl at the Window. Upon its release, it became the best-selling book in Japanese history and has been translated in over 25 languages, including Arabic, Tagalog, French, and Hindi. Toto-chan is a book detailing Kuroyanagi's experiences at Tomo Gakuen, an elementary school in Tokyo run by Sosuke Kobayashi. Mr. Kobayashi was a principal who knew children very well. He understood that they loved to have fun, which is why he incorporated fun activities into the learning processes. For example, he held sports days, indoor camps, and more such events. Besides being fun, these activities help teach the children important life lessons, like working together and persevering. Mr. Kobayashi embodied one main theme in this book: harmony and growth. He made sure the children learned their common core subjects, but he put an equal, if not greater, emphasis on their character development. One such quote from the book says, "The tomo is an ancient comma-shaped symbol, and for his school, the headmaster had adopted the traditional emblem consisting of two tomo, one black and one white, united to form a perfect circle. This symbolized his aim for the children, body and mind equally developed in perfect harmony. Tomo taught its students to love learning. In one of the many short stories in this book, the children at the school were told that there would be a library built into their campus. They were so excited for the library that they couldn't wait for it to come. When the library came, they spent their whole day sitting there and reading their books quietly. And any time it would rain, some of the children would go to the library and keep reading quietly. At the same time, Mr. Kobayashi indirectly taught his students important life lessons and helped them build their self-esteem. In one of the short stories, he opened up the school's pool for the kids to swim in. This had been a delightful surprise, but many children didn't have their swimsuits. He told them that that would not be a problem and that they could go in the pool naked. This would seem very weird for us, but Mr. Kobayashi knew that this would help children who were conscious of their bodies to be able to overcome their insecurities. One minor theme in this book was also innocence. At the time that Toto-chan went to Tomo, World War II had begun. Despite the atrocities going on all over the world, the children at Tomo stayed happy in their little bubble. After many of the stories, the author usually wrote of how the children remained blissful in their ignorance. In one of the stories, an American student had come to Japan and was enrolled in Tomo. The rest of the children were very excited to have a new pupil, especially one that came from a foreign country like the US. They helped him improve his Japanese, learn the culture, and he, in turn, told them all sorts of things about America. At the end of the story, the author said, Toto-chan and her friends learned lots of things about America. Japan and America were becoming friends at Tomo, but outside of Tomo, America had become an enemy, and since English had become an enemy language, it was dropped from the curriculum of all the schools. This book indirectly criticizes modern education methods. It serves to give teachers and educators an example of a true utopian model that schools should look to. The short stories in this book explored how classes at Tomo were taught and received. It showed how education could allow children to grow their personalities while still teaching them the Common Core subjects that they were expected to know. It also gave readers a chance to compare Tomo to their own schools and compare how they'd been taught with how the Tomo children were taught. As unbelievable as it seemed to me after reading the book that all the short stories were true, they really were. This autobiography and its Toto-chan are sweet, innocent, and wholesome. Each of the short stories teaches the readers a lesson, and combined, these lessons fit together like the pieces in a puzzle. The style of the book definitely does justice to its content. If Miss Kuroyanagi had wanted, she could have written essays analyzing her experiences as a child in elementary school. Instead, she chose to teach us indirectly and through her own personal experiences. Many of these stories were so cute and memorable that the reader can't help but smile at the sweetness of Toto-chan and her friends. In giving us stories, Ms. Kuroyanagi is making it easier for us to remember and take away the key lessons from this book. One thing that I was pleasantly surprised about was how the author was able to remember all these stories. In the epilogue, she stated that, I have invented none of these episodes. They are all events that really happened and, thankfully, I have been able to remember quite a few of them. These stories were really sweet and inspiring, and knowing that a sort of utopian model of a school had and can exist is refreshing. Another thing I liked about this book was how Miss Kuroyanagi reflected on her experiences. Throughout the book, she wrote of her mature realizations of how Mr. Kobayashi's actions impacted her and helped her through her life. For example, in one story, she wrote of how Mr. Kobayashi would tell her that she was really a good girl whenever he saw her. She wrote of how she hadn't really realized why he truly said that to her, and how she was able to realize his true motives. She also wrote of the short and long-term effects of these words. I believe this book has contributed to my mental growth by allowing me to see what it takes to make a good student. At Tomo, the children were always excited and willing to learn new things, which is rather inspiring. Students here, myself included, always complain about how boring their classes are. I've learned that the right attitude is key in undertaking any kind of journey in your lifetime. Something else that made Tomo different were the teachers themselves. Teachers were engaged, excited, and ready to help their students and teach them all sorts of things. Their attitude also went a long way in the kids' journeys, whether it was in teaching them maths or physics, or in instilling them with self-confidence. Mr. Kobayashi, especially, played a great role in the children's development. This book talked a lot about how the children grew at Tomo. Many of them were happy and excited to come to school every day because of how unique it was. All of this was only possible under Mr. Kobayashi's unconventional methods. In a way, this book serves as a guide for educators who want to help children grow. The strange methods and techniques Mr. Kobayashi used can be analyzed and rooted to a core that he believed every child should have. For example, in one story, he had a different child talk in front of the cafeteria every day about anything they wanted. Educators can incorporate strategies like these to help children learn important life skills, such as reading their peers' expressions and learning how to present themselves. Done right, education can be a powerful tool that helps children blossom into their fullest selves, and Toto-chan teaches a lesson on how to awaken this potential within each and every student. I hope that my talk will have encouraged you to pick up Toto-chan and see for yourselves the beauty of this magical school. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you, Guneet, for your review. So Toto-chan, the little girl at the window. So this writer, she's a UNICEF. She's an ambassador for the UNICEF. She's a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. So this book basically questions today's education system, the present-day education system. That's what this book is questioning. So basically it says learning should be interesting and should teach kids the way of life. And this is true for today's education system too. So very well presented. Thank you so much. So before I invite our second presenter, I want to say that yes, the tea. Everyone is welcome to have tea, coffee, or the snacks. You're welcome to go and help yourself. So the second book is by Khalil Gibran, The Prophet. This is one of the most beloved classic of its time. And now I invite Ms. Raman Kaur Panji to share the review with us, please. Thank you.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. As was said, I'm going to be talking about this book called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. So I've kind of broken the talk up into a few different sections. In the beginning, I'm going to talk a little bit about his history, his life, the author's life, a little bit about his writing and his style, and then kind of my impressions of the book. And then I'll just kind of share maybe just some final thoughts at the end. So just to give you a sense of who he was and where he was born, Khalil Gibran was born on January 6th, 1883 in Lebanon. His full name was Gibran Khalil Gibran, and his family was Maronite Christian. So, a lot of people question what religion he was, where he was from. He was from Lebanon, but he was from a Christian family. His father had many different businesses. He was a local tax collector. He ran an apothecary, but unfortunately he drank a lot. He was an alcoholic, and he ended up kind of bankrupting the family, and they spent a lot of time in poverty. I mean, he had a really difficult childhood, actually. Khalil Gibran had a difficult childhood. His mother had a son from a previous marriage and 2 daughters after Khalil, so there was 4 children. And like I said, they often lived in poverty, and the business ended up being bankrupted. So he was never really close to his father. And it kind of plays out like in his life a little bit, and you'll see later how he sort of repeats some of his, what his father did, unfortunately. To escape kind of this situation, his mother brought him and his siblings to the US. They came to Boston, Massachusetts in 1895. So he was like around 13 years old or so. I mean, he had never gone to school until then. He had never had formal education. He had had some tutoring by a local doctor who sort of saw a lot of potential in him, saw his artistic skills and his poetic bent, but he never really went to school. And Khalil Gibran ends up talking about this doctor in some of his later writings as being an early influence, and he also talks about his father as not being a good early influence on him. So there's a lot of, in his early writings, there's a lot of talk about kind of his childhood and the effect of that. So the first time he goes to school for formal education is in Boston. And he does really well. He excels. He's, again, very artistic, very poetic. But his mother and his half-brother are concerned about him becoming too Americanized. So that might sound familiar to some people. And they send him back to Lebanon for a few years for some education. He excels in Arabic learning there, and he spends a few years. And then he also sort of learns about kind of social issues, related to his culture. He does come back to the U.S., and unfortunately, there's a series of tragedies after he returns to the U.S. from Lebanon. His mother, one of his sisters, and his half-brother all die within the space of a year and a half. And so this is like a real traumatic and like significantly challenging time for him. And he ends up being dependent kind of on his one sister who runs sort of the seamstress business because he wants to pursue the arts. He's a very passionate person and very artistic, and he spends some time in the family business, but sort of then continues to pursue the arts as kind of, and his writing and his painting. But what ends up happening for him is he has a lot of benefactors in his life, even though he doesn't have a ton of family support. I mean, his sister does take care of him, but he has other outside benefactors. One of them was a photographer named Fred Holland Day, who, kind of mentored him, recognized his talent, and helped him put on his first art show. When he had his first art show, another woman named Mary Haskell becomes his benefactor, like throughout his life until his death and way beyond, actually. She takes care of him in many, many ways. She supports his arts, she supports his education, she supports his kind of even his living and, and supports many things. So she is a really important figure in his life. She helps edit his English writing because, he's a prolific Arabic writer, and he starts to become a prolific English writer as well. He had other people who supported him in his life, a poetess, Josephine Peabody, who helped him for some time, and he had other women actually in his life that ended up helping him edit his work and things like that. But the main, I guess, the stalwart kind of figure in his life, throughout his life, is Mary Haskell. She helped him financially and with his writing career. And they had an extremely deep relationship. Their relationship continues to be questioned as far as like what was the exact extent and like breadth and depth of their relationship, but that was really never revealed. Some of her diaries and some of his diaries have become public since, but there's still some controversy surrounding exactly what that relationship was. But she ended up marrying somebody else. She was 10 years older than him, but she did in 1908 help him finance an educational trip to Paris. He spent a couple of years in Paris. He was able to study under the painter Auguste Rodin. And, and he also encountered a lot of Syrian thinkers, activists. So he ended up being really socially active in the humanities as well. And this really kind of affected him throughout his life. After he returns to the US from Paris, he moved to New York because then Boston seemed kind of backward after Paris. So he moves to New York, again financially supported by Mary Haskell. He continues to write and publish through a wide variety of essays, stories, narratives, poetry. He considers himself primarily a painter, not a writer, even though it's writing of books like this that make him famous. And when you go through a lot of his books, a lot of them have paintings and drawings in them. So it's just really interesting how he flows in these arts between writing and painting, and even his writing sometimes feels like a painting because he'll like expose one subject kind of at length. So it's interesting. So he's published a long list of books, and I'll kind of share that list with you in a moment. And he was widely published in both languages, Arabic and English, and he was a huge Arabic language supporter. But most of his work after 1918 is in English. You know, he is considered, again, like he considered himself a painter, but he's considered a poet, even though a lot of his books are in prose, or they're very lyrical, even though they might be in prose. He was really lyrical and mystical in his writing, and he wrote, you know, many different things, essays, newspaper articles, and he stayed connected to Arabic writing throughout, through his life and through associations like the Pen League to support Arabic writing and literature, and he was connected with people like his friend Mikhail Naimi. And I know Harjot Kaur talked about Naimi when she went over the book of, you know, Mirdad. And he met Naimi in 1916, and their friendship endures throughout his life. They worked on Arabic language publications and newspapers together. Like I said, they had this association. They were, you know, they supported Arabic writing throughout kind of, you know, New York and beyond. And he is considered a hero of the Arabic language in his native Lebanon. So I just looked up, like, the Poetry Foundation says his themes of alienation, disruption, and lost rural beauty and security in a modernizing world also resonated with the experiences of his readers. So that's one of the reviews I sort of read about him. He quickly found admirers and imitators among Arabic writers, and his reputation as a central figure of Arabic literary modernism has never been challenged. So that's not my words, those are somebody else's. He's also active in political, social, and humanitarian causes, as I mentioned before. So, you know, again, back to his personal life, he had multiple romantic involvements in his life, but no marriage or children. So it seems to me, I guess I was really struck because I read the book before I read his biography, and it really struck me that his personal life was really challenging, actually. His relationships with women were fraught. He drank a lot. Again, like his father drank a lot, he also drank a lot. So it's so interesting to me to imagine that a passionate, mystical writer, like when you read his book, you can't imagine having him having a mundane life here on earth, and that to a life that has a lot of difficulty in it. But he struggled on a personal, worldly level, and he died of cirrhosis of the liver in 1931 at age 42. He asked that he be buried in Lebanon and that the royalties from his American publications were willed to his hometown in Lebanon. His paintings and drawings, anything left in his studio, he willed to Mary Haskell, who lived to age 90. She didn't die until 1964. And she ended up donating them in 1950 to a museum, guess where, in Savannah, Georgia. Who would have thought? And she, like I said, she died in 1964 at the age of 90. So like I said, he considered himself mostly a painter, but it was this book, The Prophet, that made him famous. The Prophet is considered to be a book of poetic essays, and it contains a lot of several drawings as well. Many of his books do, actually. And even when they're listed, they'll say, you know, how many drawings each of the books has. And what's interesting to me, and I'll kind of touch on this subject, it's interesting that, that Guneet Kaur mentioned you know, children being allowed to swim without clothes on. He talks a little bit about that in his book as well, like this idea of why we wear clothes and what we are ashamed of and what we think of our bodies. So I think it's just really interesting that you know, that theme came up earlier as well. But the drawings in this book are often of nudes. So the first time I kind of read it and I was looking at the pictures, I had a different reaction. And then as I read through the book a few times, my reaction to those drawings kept changing. So I think, and my reaction to all of his writing keeps changing. Each time you read any of his passages, they hit you differently and you pick up something different from them. So I think it's, you can never really say you've read the book, you can say you've experienced part of it. And I think that's how it feels a lot of times with some of these mystic writings. So the list of books include The Madman, The Forerunner, Jesus, Son of Man, The Earth Gods, The Wanderer, The Garden of the Prophet, Prose Poem, Nymphs of the Valley, Spirits Rebellious, and A Tear and a Smile. So Jesus, Son of Man was kind of his most expansive work, and it was really, he considered it his most important. He really wanted to write about Jesus in a different way than he's been presented before. So this was a really important book to him. And some of the books are narrative, some are short stories, poetry, and almost all of them contain drawings, as I said. So coming to The Prophet. It was written in 1923. and it made him a celebrity. It has sold millions of copies, making it the best-selling book of poetry of the 20th century, if we consider it poetry. I mean, when you read it, I guess you could consider it story, allegory, mysticism, but it does have a real poetic flow to it as well. So I think, you know, but they do call it the best-selling book of poetry of the 20th century. When The Prophet came out, it did not receive critical acclaim. It was rejected as being too simplistic and sentimental. Critics did not think his poetry was that elevated, but the masses loved it. The Prophet was in the middle of the pack in the timing perspective. So it was kind of, if you consider where he wrote it, it was in 1923. He dies in 1933, I said. So it wasn't his earliest or his latest book. And it has been, and they say, based on Mary Haskell's diary accounts, it was conceived of at least 10 years before 1923. There are writings all the way back to 1912 where he talks about wanting to write this book. It's been translated in at least 20 languages and has sold 9 million copies in the American edition alone. It kind of waxes and wanes in popularity over the years as different generations discover it. I mean, it's kind of interesting that, like, they talk about different generations discovering it. When I was in high school, I used to work in a bookstore, and this book wouldn't stay on the shelves. Like, it was sold out all the time. So it's really interesting to me that it's different times, different places that this book sells. And it had a huge resurgence in the 1960s in the countercultural movement of the United States, that turbulent era in the United States, because people were looking for a break from traditional thought processes and traditional religions. So that's a little bit of a history of the book and a little bit about it. You know, so to discuss it, as I said, it's like really kind of difficult for me to describe the experience of reading it, but it's set as a story, a kind of an allegory about a great teacher named Al-Mustafa on an island called Orphalese. He's been there 12 years, and the ship to take him back to his home has arrived in port. He starts to depart, and he talks about what it feels like to leave, you know, this place that he's been in isolation and he's been sort of imprisoned in for these many years. But the people of Orphalese surround him and start to ask him questions so that they can have and document his wisdom, even if he is no longer in their midst. So they're kind of feeling like, just again, they're feeling this like separation, and they want to kind of capture his wisdom. It's written in a series of poetical essays on a variety of topics. So kind of each chapter has a topic, a question that the people ask him. And on the surface, they seem like the regular thoughts that we have about our lives on a daily basis. But his answers are surprising each time. These thoughts and questions come from different people of Orphalese, but they're led by Al-Mitra, the seeress. So as I read the answers he gives, sometimes I find myself agreeing, sometimes feeling offended, sometimes it gave me a new way of thinking. So I kind of picked out, you know, I allowed myself to sort of just read some of them, and I picked out kind of some lines from each, from like different chapters that sort of struck me kind of on first blush, right? You know, and they're not in order or in context, so they're just sort of pulled out of there, but I thought they were really touching to me when I was reading them. So here's just a sample of some of them. You know, he said, "Who can depart from his pain and aloneness without regret?" So he's saying he's leaving his pain and aloneness. He's going back home, but he is regretting even leaving his pain behind. And he says, "All alone and without his nest shall the eagle get across the sun." So ultimately, we're always alone, you know, in that final journey. And he says, "Am I a harp that the hand of the mighty may touch me, or a flute that his breath may pass through me?" And then on these different subjects he's asked about, on love, he says, "When love beckons, follow, even though the way may be sharp and steep, for as love crowns you, so he will crucify you. Love is sufficient, and it has no expectations. Love has no desire but to fulfill itself. Love is pain and pleasure. Bear the pain joyfully." He writes about children. You are from which the bow of your children fly. They are not yours. Life does not go backward. The children move forward." And he says, on giving, give of yourself unasked, not just to the deserving, but through understanding. The receivers do not have to feel gratitude. And he talks about eating. There's a long chapter on eating. He says eating is worship, and he kind of describes what that worship is like, and it's very impressive. And and it's interesting. He talks about eating meat, and he talks about eating vegetarian, and it's just really interesting how he just talks about eating. On work, he says work with love, not as a burden. Work is love made visible. And on joy and sorrow, he says they're inseparable. Only when you are empty can you stand still and be balanced. So this was joy and sorrow was actually one of my favorite sections, because I think that's what we spend our life trying to resist sorrow and embrace joy, and they really do come together. You can't. And he talks about our houses, they're trapping us. We should be running free in nature. And he says we wear clothes out of shame of our bodies, and we don't let our bare feet and our hair run free. We have false modesty, and we have a fear of nakedness. So this was really interesting to me, considering all of his paintings and his books. And he says, the needs of the least of us shall be satisfied. And he said on laws, like legals, who are you trying to control? And on crime and punishment, he says, the victim is not blameless. The wrongdoer cannot do wrong without the will of everyone. The black and the white thread are woven together. And he says, if you're studying something, you say, I have found a truth when learning. I have not found the truth. And say, I have met a soul walking on my path. And it's interesting, you were talking about teachers and what kind of students you should be. And he says, a teacher leads you to the threshold of your mind. And he says, there's no purpose in friendship than the deepening of the spirit, right? He says, you talk when you cease to be at peace with your thoughts. And you are good when you are one with yourself, and you are evil when you are not. So beauty is life when life unveils her holy face, and life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. So these are just snippets. I think each section of the book can be discussed for hours probably. The philosophy in the book often resonated with me. It made me think of looking at things in a different way. Each thought is challenging, asking us to remove our preconceived notions and be completely honest with ourselves, looking at our authentic self and to go outside our bodies and thoughts. His writing is really challenging. I can only read a little bit of it at a time. It has to be digested really slowly. Because every time we come across a thought, we want to disagree or agree with everything instead of just experiencing it. We want to form an opinion right away, and I think it's an idea just to experience it. I've read many of the sections multiple times, and each time different things jump out at me. And I think Harjoti said this about the book of Mirdad, you cannot ever totally read this book. You can experience it in different ways. So, this reminds me of Gurbani in many ways, how we do Path every day and we can learn something new each time, right? I feel these were not direct teachings, but more of an asking us to retrain our minds to think differently, or maybe not think at all. Just experience and accept. So often when reading the book, I wished I could be free and light the way he describes, not worry about homes and money and children and what clothes to wear and what to read and what to learn and right and wrong and good and evil. Just relax and be happy the way the Creator wants you to be. None of this is yours. Your children are not yours. Death and life are intertwined. These are liberating thoughts. So I think that, often I feel like I want to be liberated. He focuses on the dual nature of life. Good and evil are hand in hand. Love crowns you and crucifies you. Happiness cannot exist without sadness. Another of his themes is how fearful and judgmental we are, and these two things go hand in hand. Whatever negative we see in ourselves, we project it on others. And that's why there's fear and judgment, judging good, evil, crime, and punishment, considering ourselves and others, worried about time always. So Guru Granth Sahib asks us to think the same way. Get rid of our senses of home and self, just immerse and love the Guru and be a carefree child of the Guru. Rise above time, space, and body. So I don't think his writing is anywhere as deep as Gurbani, or that it will give us, Sahaj or Mukti or Anand the way Gurbani can. But if we can start to change the way of our thinking, open our mind, clear the rubbish, the blocks, we have a chance of grabbing Guru's palla, right? So I think of reading books like this as maybe opening our minds, maybe creating a clearing in which we can create a new path forward, or maybe make real connections with ourselves and our guru and our true selves. So thanks for this opportunity to share. I recommend this book to everyone, and sorry for all the mistakes, and if I've gone on too long, I don't know how long it's been, and I cannot say I really could review this book or understand it, but I could just share some of the thoughts I had. So before I close, I would really recommend for fun that you watch a cartoon movie called The Prophet. It was shown at the Detroit Institute of Arts and is available to rent for like $3 or $4 on YouTube. It's a fantasy version of this book with Almitra cast as a young girl who's mute. She doesn't speak. It's really entertaining. I really complimented the book. So thank you again for listening, and sorry for any mistakes. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you, Raman Korpanji, for the wonderful summary of the book. In one sentence, if I have to summarize it, I would say that it clears the dust from our minds. It shows the reality, what actually we should be. So now so the third book is going to be Spirit-Born People by Professor Puran Singh. It is basically intended, it's for the Sikh youth of the Punjab. I'm sorry, I'm being a little nervous about it. But I invite Isha Korpanji to please come and present her views.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you to everyone for having this wonderful gathering, and to the other presenters, you guys did a really good job. I hope that I unfortunately kind of came into it a little bit late and started my reading a little bit late of this. So I hope that I can present to you a short kind of review of the book. I'll also start a little bit about the author, Professor Puran Singh. So he had a really interesting life, I thought. He was born in 1881 and passed away in 1931. It was fascinating because he was a Punjabi poet. He's kind of known as like one of the acclaimed founders of modern Punjabi poetry, but he was actually a scientist as well and a very famous mystic. So he had a lot of different interests and a lot of different things that he engaged in and studied to really get to where he ended up, because this book was actually published posthumously. And so I'll get to that in a little bit, but it was interesting that he wrote it not too long before he passed away. So as I mentioned, he was born in 1881. He was born in Rawalpindi, part of which is now Pakistan, to an Amritdhari Sikh family. He himself started out his life as an Amritdhari Sikh. So he went to school in Rawalpindi, and then before he finished his degree there, he was actually chosen, just a couple of students, I believe, were chosen to on a scholarship to study industrial chemistry to Tokyo in Japan in like a pharmaceutical sciences program. So while in Japan, he not only studied, he got his degree, but then he also became very influenced by a Japanese Buddhist monk, and he actually became a Buddhist while he was in Japan. So it was really interesting because he went to Japan, he came back a Buddhist, and so he shaved his hair off, everything, and to the ultimate shock of his family and his community. Then he sort of, as he was still, obviously he had a lot of interest in mysticism and spirituality, and he continued to sort of go on this journey. He eventually met with somebody called Swami Ramtirath, and then he became sort of a follower of Swami Ramtirath for a while. So he then, he continued sort of along those lines. He became a sannyasi. He refused to get married, things like that. And again, more, difficulties with his family. But he was just very, very much into his spiritual journey. He had a different path, a different focus. He was continuing at the same time to work as a scientist, and eventually he ended up at an agricultural conference run by a group of Sikh scientists. And so he was invited to speak there, and at the time he was called Swami Puran Singh. And he actually met up with the famous writer Bhai Singh there. When he talked to him, Bhai Singh listened to him, spoke with him, and he was really interested to understand, why this very brilliant gentleman was now, he was a Swami, first he was a monk, and, what was actually going on. And Bhai Singh, it's claimed anyway, that in his biography, that Bhai Singh influenced him, talked to him and said, you really need to settle your mind before you can decide which path you want to go on. And eventually he came back around and returned to Sikhi later on. So it was interesting. And he eventually did get married, to the happiness of his family, but he continued along his mystical journey as well as his scientific journey. So I just found it so interesting, the dichotomy, because he was so influenced by, he met Walt Whitman, the American poet. He was also influenced by the Japanese artist and scholar Okakura Kakuzo. So there's a lot of parallels to some of the other authors that were spoken of today about their kind of wide range of interests, wide range of talents, their artistic as well as their passion for mysticism. They're kind of looking at the world as more, how can we make it ideal? How can we find the beauty in this world? And that's really what the mysticism, the joy, was all about for Professor Puran Singh. So eventually he started a business of distilling essential oils. He had a lot of ups and downs with his business. He sold it. He then started working for another company, and eventually he suffered a lot of financial and losses during his lifetime too, for various reasons. There was floods for things that he was growing for his business, and then later he eventually contracted tuberculosis, and that's how he passed away in 1931. So the poet part of him, the writer part of him, he loved nature, beauty. He wrote both in English and in Punjabi. So it was interesting because most of his works were actually in English, but as I said, he was known as the founder of modern Punjabi poetry. So he composed 3 volumes of Punjabi poetry, and it was kind of more of a free verse. He explored experiences of villagers, peasants, and then for English, in his prose writing, he wrote a lot of books, but I'll name a few. It was The Sisters of the Spinning Wheel, Unstrung Beads, The Spirit of Oriental Poetry, and then he wrote 7 baskets of prose poems, so poems that are also prose. Then he later wrote the Book of the 10 Masters, Spirit-Born People. So and like I said, he also wrote a book in Hindi. So there's many works of Professor Puran Singh. Several of his works were published posthumously, and this was actually one of them. So I'm just going to read a little excerpt from the Punjab University professor that presented about this book when they first published it after I think this was 1981 that they actually talked about this. So he says, these are the lecture notes for addresses I propose to deliver to the Sikh youth of Punjab. But as I'm placed in the desert away from the towns where they gather, I let these go undelivered. And also because the Sikh youth are running in haste after shadows, turning their backs of the son of the sons, the Guru. The world of the Guru, the beautiful, is different, and their world, how different. So to them, the values of fiction and fact have been hopelessly interchanged. Still, I hope these addresses will reach them by and by. So it's almost like he's calling to them. And he says, the Sikh youth is everywhere, the youth that has the disciple consciousness, aspiring to love the beautiful, which alone is truly good, truly noble, and truly divine. The form beautiful appearing only rarely in ages and fascinating the disciple consciousness and vanishing in the eternal background of the spiritual inner infinite is the Guru beautiful, the bridegroom. The disciple consciousness, thenceforward restless without that presence or the sense of that presence, is the spirit-born people, the brides. So I just thought that was a really beautiful introduction to what the spirit-born people is, because it's kind of, there is chapters sort of, but it's more of a rambling, it's more of a kind of a prose poem. It's poetic prose. It's rhetoric. The tone and quality of it is very much kind of a manifesto of the spirit of the mystic. So it's really interesting because it doesn't really go in any particular order. So it's got a lot of interesting sort of changes in what it's talking about in terms of content, but the message keeps coming back to the same thing. So again, back from the Punjab University, it says, I take this to be the condition of Professor Puran Singh's beautiful and moving work in English. The spirit-born people, written in a highly poetic prose, is rhetoric, is visionary in tone and quality. Its appeal thus is at once numinous and aesthetic. No wonder as we peruse its leaping and lambent passages, we begin to realize the power of his possessed muse. With Professor Puran Singh, a poem or prose is an act of inebriation. That's why it enlists us as an ally when in full tide. So this volume was written 3 years before his death in 1931, and it just talks about how he affirms his faith. So to him, to be born Sikh or to be baptized as a Sikh is basically meant to be immersed in the Bani. So he kind of takes it. So the way that the book is composed, he starts off talking about Bhai Buddha-ji and his life and his journey to the Guru. Then he talks about Guru Nanak Dev Ji, talks about Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and then he wraps around into some of the compositions like Asa Divar, like Japji Sahib, like Guru Arjan Dev Ji Sukhmani Sahib, and he talks about doing Simran, what does that mean to him, how it influenced him, interwoven with English poetry of Walt Whitman and then other Oriental poetry. So, and then he starts to talk about history. He talks about the Vaisakhi day when Guru Gobind Singh called to the Sikhs, what that meant to him. And then he talks about, then he goes back around to Bhagat Nam Dev Ji. All of this, so again, no particular order, it seems, at least it didn't seem to me, but beautiful sort of rendition about how they found their journey to enlightenment, how they used these tools, and how he views these things. He also talks about politics. He talks about colonialism, racism, feminism, a woman's role. so many things that he touches upon, and how they're told from the Guru or the Bani perspective. So for example, and I'm sorry if it sounds like there's so many different things, but he touches upon those things in very short passages throughout the book. And I'll give you a couple of examples that I noted. The title Sikh was given to us by Guru Nanak. We were corpses. He poured life into us. We were thus created anew by his love of us. He made us alive, and out of our drawn out love of him, and left us free. He made us free of hatred, of caste, color, and creed. He made us look straight at the sky towards the infinite, and the sun and the moon and the stars became our kith and kin. He knit us with the universe and wove the design of the infinite into the texture of our soul. So it's like he used metaphors to explain the metaphors in Gurbani. In this kingdom, dream and vision, there's no place for duality, hatred, and harm. He talks about the Guru's revolutionary thought of getting rid of the old philosophical systems. So until we reject whatever we have ourselves and get rid of ourselves and get ourselves caught in the cosmic attraction of the Guru's consciousness, we have to be engulfed in his love. So again, it's a book, a manifesto of spiritual consciousness, covering areas of the devotion of the gurus, the bhagats, mystics like Jesus Christ, like Buddha, Japanese mystics, poets, artists, the spiritual events, like I mentioned, when Guru Gobind Singh gathered the Sikhs on Vaisakhi, he said, he gathered the waves of the ocean of consciousness. When he talked about, it was interesting the way he talked about Gais, for example. He said that the Guru gathered the Sikhs like a mother gathers the hair of the child. The master washed and combed them and bound them into a knot. No distinction or separation of men, of castes or creeds. Those who don't understand the law of love shouldn't wear the master's love. We glow like flowers on the thorny bed or on the bed of velvet moss with equal joy for facing him and living and breathing him your life. So interesting, the same thing, joy and pain coming together as one thing and coming as one, but we're facing it all with joy when we sit in the love of the Guru. So another point that I was really interested in is when he talked about doing Simran, like reciting actual repetition of Simran. He reminds us again that where there's no judgment, equality for all, that's what is Simran. And he says, what is the use of repeating his name? It is a mechanical, tiresome task. To the restless intellect, it is just so, perhaps. However, to the poet, how beautiful is the constant footfall of man who go beating a track in the trackless forest, those with soft flesh feet repeating the rhythm, going on and cutting a direction. As the feet of men fall and beat a path, so my lips repeating his name cut a direction for my soul. So, wow, that really, I was like, okay, now I really want to do Simran. When I heard that, I mean, it was cutting a direction to my soul. So another point he says, he talks about, again, he mentioned a lot of his interpretation of the various parts of Gurbani. For example, he talks about how Guru Nanak used Asakivar to free us with his love. He says, better death than a life of slavery or compromise. He gave us our sovereignty. He says, why repeat Japji Sahib every day? It is if you love the Guru, lie at his feet and cry out his hymns. Drop the vanity of self. Meeting the Guru has extinguished a life of separation. Man finds the soul of the universe. So again, we always ask ourselves, why do we need to repeat it every day? It was so interesting to me. And then, we brought up the same kind of thing. If you reading Bani every day, learning something new, sometimes listening to it from that perspective really touched me. And like I said, there's no, the book had no particular order, and this has no particular order as far as I'm just bringing out things that kind of made sense to me and touched me. Buddha Singh said that, all of our existing systems of ethics and religions and societies tend to make stones of us. They tend to make us cold and unfeeling to another. So it's so interesting. He talked about that in the context of colonialism, and I thought about that, and I was like, where has it led us to today? We look at corporate greed, violence, corruption, and it's true. Our system of ethics has really done that because we've gone away from our spirit, our soul. But we also see the good. We still see the people who exist in the world who are true, wonderful spirits, who are doing seva, helping those in need, who are taking care of them. They're transcending the evil and the darkness. Those, he says, are the spirit-born people. On feminism, he talks about how the Guru transcends that sex through sex. Woman as the center of life on earth. And he quotes Guru Nanak by saying, we are born of women, wedded to women, and slandering women is slandering your soul. The enslaved womanhood was freed from its bondage of the soul. He even expressed, and it was interesting because there was a section where he talked about when Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, went to Harmandir Sahib and was turned away, and he was okay to leave that building. And he says it was the Sikh women who actually convinced him to save the physical form of the Harmandir Sahib. Even though, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji showed that he wasn't attached to it, but he felt like it was kind of like they had a sort of knowing that eventually this would become a place for Sikhs to gather in. There was some strange contradictions in some of the things that he did talk about, especially, one thing I noted about feminism. One quote in the book is that he decries both veiling and unveiling. Both deny the woman a personhood as each views her through the lens of sex difference. But if the veil accentuates the sex difference, or if unveiling does the same, both are unholy. So it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Like, did he really believe that women should be veiled or unveiled? Maybe there was some conflict in his view of women. But I think that overall general message he kept coming back to was placing feminism as the exalted state of the soul. So, he does talk about that. So another, and again, sorry for the jumping around a little bit, but and another item that he talked about was the Sukhmani Sahib, and I thought this was really beautiful because he compared Sukhmani Sahib to the Harimandir, but built in song. So the Harmandir Sahib itself, but built in song. He said, if repeating Japji is life, we actually meet the master in the sound of Sukhmani. The heavens resound with its lilt. So that was kind of a really beautiful quote, I thought, as far as Sukhmani Sahib. He also talks about the Akal Ustat of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. And he says, without the spirit within us, both life and death are devoid of meaning and truth. He says that Akal Ustat talks about living life to its fullest expression. Also throughout the book, he quotes the Bible, he quotes many Muslim practices. So I thought, it was really, really interesting to me because I thought, again, it kept coming back to what the beauty of this book really was focusing on the spirit rather than the person or the being. For me personally, what I kind of got out of that is that it almost takes the pressure off, because sometimes when we say, I'm a Sikh, there's a lot of loaded kind of pressure that is built into that, because there's so much question and insecurity about who we are, what we're doing. Are we doing enough bhat? Are we doing the right bhat? How many times are we doing it? So many questions about what is right and wrong, how we look, how we behave, how much we're doing, whatever it is that we're doing, and does that make us Sikh enough or not? So there's so much, there's so many questions for us, and especially as women, a lot of times too, just from my own perspective, as a parent, as a spouse, as a child, there's all these different roles we have to fulfill, and also sometimes it feels like pressure that we have to fulfill them in a certain way being a Sikh, but when we can just focus on our spirit, on our sentient self, and just immerse in the idea that the Guru loves us unconditionally, that we're beautiful, divine beings, perfect just as we are. We don't have to be anything more or less. We are enough because the Guru created us this way. We are exactly who we're supposed to be. We're grateful at our existence at the feet of the Guru, that love will permeate our life and everything that we do. We can have a daily gratitude of our human existence. We can realize the wonder, the vismad, the birds in the trees, the flowers blooming, the miracle of our breath entering and leaving our body, the small moments in time that we get to spend with those that we love. These are the small daily miracles that we can all experience, but sometimes we don't appreciate. I think that's really what the spirit of this book was all about, for me anyway. So I would definitely recommend it. I hope that, I'm sorry, like I said, it was kind of all over the place, but so was the book a little bit, so. But, and I apologize, for any mistakes. I know it wasn't a super well-organized presentation, but I do hope you will read it and enjoy it. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Spirit-born people, thank you, Isha Korpenji, for the beautiful review. This certainly encourages us to read the book, definitely for me at least. Now I invite Harjot Kaur for the closing remarks, please. Harjot.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. The mark of a good book, a worthwhile book, is that it subconsciously leads us to a dialogue between our emotional realization and the intellectuality that lies in our consciousness. And almost invariably, the first impression that we make out of a good book is through emotionality. It somehow pierces our emotional selves and it leaves some impressions, and the words of the books, they resonate in our mind without us really consciously thinking about it. And we may think of a matter differently after reading a book about children, for instance. Benji Raman Kaur illustrated an example from the Prophet of children coming from us but not really ours, right? So about topics like these, what we find is that, subconsciously the import of the emotional realization starts wanting to stay back in our mind, and that's the stage at which true knowledge starts to tap our minds. Because the nature of emotionality is ephemeral, it is short-lived, it's elusive, it's there a given day, it's not there the other day. That's the nature of emotionality, but that's not the nature of knowledge. Knowledge permeates in our mind deep through the different levels of consciousness. And that's what books such as the ones that have been read in this book session are about. They are those kind of books which are telling of true knowledge. Because once, I am pretty sure that with the reading of the books that 3 readers have done today, that they are taking some perpetual, forever to stay imports of these books, which is what the true knowledge is. Now, the nature of knowledge is also that when it is not within us and it's coming from a corner which, and we've not really had exposure to that knowledge, it'll probably intrigue us, it'll probably also make us jealous that, well, someone is saying these things, but I don't believe in them, etc., etc. But books very stealthily allow that knowledge to gently knock at the doors of your mind and permeate your mind, and on the willing of the knowledge itself, it becomes a part of yourself, and you cannot escape that. That's the nature of books, such as the ones that we have chosen to read as a sorority in the Sikh Women Book Club. So, many laudable congratulations to the speakers today. You know, the books that you have read today are bestsellers. They are timeless classics. They are a true heritage of the humankind. So I really laud your efforts in reading the books and exposing those to us. You know, Tetsuko Kuryonagi's Toto-chan book, right? It talks about Toto-chan's experiences in World War II, coming out of a school that forever changed her life, the way that she came to expect of education, the way that perhaps the Americans who went into that school, you know, they gathered about the Japanese culture. This is cross-culture pollination. This is universalization right there. And so schools, headmasters, and what we teach and how we teach can have a forever impact on the lives of people. This is what is one of the main imports of the book that Guneet Kaur talked about. You know, the book, The Prophet, Khalil Gibran. I bet that once we read the book, we're not going to think about love, marriage, law, you know, clothes, houses, freedom, religion, the same way that we would have been thinking before reading the book. And that's, I'm ready to bet a wager on that. And that's, again, the characteristic of a good book. The spirit-born people. This is the, and Professor Puran Singh calls a spirit-born people are those people, a man or a woman, who are seeking to be the true disciples of the Guru. And in the pursuit of that discipleship, we, a man or a woman, anyone who is physically abode on the earth, is the bride. And the Guru is the bridegroom. And through the process of discipleship for the Guru, we become his brides. So the spirit-born people, this book is written from the angle of a bride who's pursuing his bridegroom by forever committing to be his disciple. So when we imbibe the disciplehood in ourselves, and we read about Pende Khan Sakhi, and we read about Bhagat Namdev Sakhi, these are the readings of a disciple. These are not the readings of anyone who generally wants to know about who Bhagat Namdev was. The pursuit of a disciple is very different, and the spirit-born people really encourages us, really prays for all the brides on this earth to imbibe them in themselves the disciplehood, you know, so that all of us can be the brides of the bridegroom, our Guru. So I really encourage you all to pick up these books. These are very readily available on Amazon. Experience these for yourselves and be on your journey as well. I want to take this opportunity to mention a couple things before we part. One is that the next session of this book club, the session 3 of the book club, will be conducted on July 2nd. We will have 3 speakers. Mrs. Amarpreet Tillon, she's going to talk about the 10 Masters, again, a book by Professor Puran Singh. Mona Ahuja, she is going to be talking about the 10 Bulls, which is one of the leading works in Buddhism. And Amardeep Syan, she's going to talk about 7 Baskets of Prose, again a work from Professor Puran Singh. So that's what we have in store in the next session. We eagerly invite you to be a part of the session next time as well. And finally, as Gurpreet Kaur was indicating in the beginning, is we're having a poetry recital by Sikh youth and adults to commemorate the 100 years of Sikh migration into Michigan. We are inviting youth and adults to submit their poems, poems which help you celebrate Michigan in your own unique way, in your own grateful way. Please send us an email to nathpragasusa@gmail.com with your poems, as well as fill up the form for us. That way we'll have an accurate track of who's participating and what's the theme of the poem. With that, on behalf of Mata Tripta Gurukar and Nath Pragas USA, I'd like to thank you all for coming today and being a part of our collective journey. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.